Dan, things have been happening at literally lightning speed and nowhere more than in your field, the field of AI, and it's affecting all of us. So you're excited at this point?
Very exciting. I mean, this is one of the largest, if not the largest infrastructure project in AI in our history. I think it's groundbreaking and it creates an incredible opportunity for the United States and really for the world and probably mankind.
So this is the Stargate thing you're talking about. Explain to me what that is. I use AI all the time now, but I don't understand all this stuff.
Yeah, so yesterday, President Trump announced the Stargate project, which is really a collaboration between OpenAI, Oracle, SoftBank, and MGX. And it initially started with a $100 billion investment. I think the thought process is going to be $500 billion over 4 years. I'm sure it's timing itself with the Trump administration to get all that investment in. And, just on the jobs front, which is why I think, everybody may go to that initially. I think it's going to add 100,000 jobs in the United States, but that's not really the story. The story here is exactly what this project means for the United States and how we could become, we already are a world leader in AI, but how this would even accelerate that even more.
So explain to me how that happens.
Well, I think it's going to happen for a lot of reasons because there's a tremendous amount of competition that's occurring in this space. And I would say competition's good. And we can talk a little bit about what we're seeing, but clearly the Chinese and many other parts of the world are competing on these models. I mean, it hasn't been that long. We're talking a couple of years to a word like Chat GPT has become the Kleenex or Google word. I'm hearing people going, I'm going to Chat GPT that, right?
Right.
People have really gotten more comfortable with using that language. But those models, although, neural intelligence, being able to create content, they pale in comparison with what's happening in the world of AI, particularly when it comes to reasoning and having this multi-agent thinking model.
Well, so explain to me how Stargate, this big, maybe $500 billion thing, affects my life. If I work in an office, if I'm a professional, how does it affect me?
Well, let me back off for just a minute and give you just a little bit of intro to kind of ChatGPT. So I like to think of ChatGPT like it's like basically you're preparing for a test. So the ChatGPT that everybody's using today, it's like a closed book test. We've had to train those models on literally trillions of bits of data. They have it in their brain. It's incredibly expensive to train those models. And then when you ask it a question, it basically just puts language together to give you an answer. It's like you're studying for a closed book test. The newer models are like you're studying for an open book test. In these particular models, you don't have to have all the training. You don't have to have all the information. You just need to know enough. And when you go into the test, you have the ability to go find the information that you need because you never know what question is going to come to you. So why is this important? Well, the amount of compute power that can be leveraged in not training, but actually going after the answer is incredible. So in fields like healthcare and scientific discovery, where we don't even know the questions to ask ourselves, these models have the ability to create an answer, debate the answer, and then go back and make the answer even better. And not only that, they can hold huge amounts of context, and context is just the question. So we can give them incredible amounts of question, and they can solve those questions and answers on their own.
So how does Stargate facilitate that? What does Stargate have to do with that?
Well, so there's a tremendous amount of compute power that's required in these models, right? You've got to have data centers that can be able to do this massive amount of compute. And that compute requires a lot of energy, right? So you got to be able to put these in areas where you have a very stable energy supply and you can create this kind of technology. So you need that compute power to make these models work. So the one that was talked about yesterday had to do with healthcare. And just think about it today. I mean, if there was something that needed tackled in this world today that needs to be disrupted, it's going to be healthcare. And particularly, we can talk about all kinds of things like improving your lifestyles and all that. But if we could just cure disease, imagine the impact that would have on both cost savings and improving the life of people. So one of the projects here is to think about how we cure disease. And I think the example that they used was cancer. And if you think about it, I think the story that was told yesterday, I'm just sort of repeating it and paraphrasing it. But when you have cancer, little bits of DNA actually rotate through your body. There's a test out now called Gallery test, kind of a first or second generation. Yeah, you can detect if you've got certain types of cancer. But imagine if you could detect that cancer, rapidly program a vaccine for it, administer the vaccine, be cured for the cancer. That's the kind of technology that these new models offer. And it's just been historically unavailable because we did not have the technology and weren't smart enough to do it.
Okay, I see. And I think what you said also is this has specific relevance for Texas.
Well, the initial announcement we talked about was in Abilene, where the data centers in being constructed. And this is actually really interesting. It's got kind of an interesting backstory, if you will. Texas has had a lot of energy information that's going on. People are always talking about the grid and whether or not we have enough energy. And you might think, wow, here we are plopping down a giant energy sucking sound, right, in Abilene, Texas. But here's the thing. That requires the state to build energy structure to supply it, which means that as a whole, it's going to be beneficial for the state. It's going to employ people. It's going to require us to create more energy, which we're really good at in Texas. And it probably in the long run, even though it's a consumer, it'll give us energy reserve. I mean, because think about it. You can always flip a computer off if you need energy back in the grid. So it's an opportunity for that energy to be banked, if you will, and stored for the state. And at the same time, it's a great opportunity for Texas to leverage an asset to create something.
Okay, as we move forward, and I think you and I talked earlier something about it's the Chinese R model. Is that right? As we move forward with these kinds of things, where are you on jobs? Are people still how worried are you about people losing jobs to these?
Well, so let's talk a little bit about the Chinese. I mean, it was, I think, coincidental, right, that these model announcements happened at the same time because I think the infrastructure was unrelated. But the Chinese did release DeepSeek R1, which is an open source model, which is a reasoning style model. And it's really cool because I'll be honest with you, the performance has really rivaled that of OpenAI's O1 model. It's
right.
Almost free. I mean, it's not, but compared to the cost of O1, it's actually just almost free. A little bit of a side note, the professional version of ChatGPT is $200 a month. And just to let you know, OpenAI is losing money on it because people have figured out that this O1 model is so darn good that professional developers and people who are power users are probably overusing it. So that's how good it is, right? The Chinese model is like a fraction. I don't know the number, but I think it's like 10% of the cost or less. It's incredibly cheaper. Plus, you get to see insight into how it reasons and how it answers questions, which can be impactful because it can help you figure out how to pose that question again in the future. Is it going to take away your job? I don't think so. I think what we're going to see in these models is transitions in jobs. Think about the Industrial Revolution. I mean, we employ way more people today than we ever did back then. People were working on farms and all of a sudden they could go to work in factories. It wasn't that actually jobs went away. Jobs just changed. We're just going to be able to do a lot more. And an individual is going to be able to do a lot more productivity than they've ever thought they could do before.
I want to ask you one more thing about the Chinese model, since you brought that up. There's been a lot of conversation about China and the US being in a race on the whole AI thing. How does is it Stargate, right? How does this affect that in any way?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think there is a race going on, and I think there is an attempt by the Trump administration and through this investment that we're going to win it, right? We're going to put American might into solving this problem. And clearly the leaders in this industry, I mean, I think Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, was kind of highlighted at the meeting yesterday as being one of the smartest people in AI in the world. And he's of course, when a United States citizen has a company located here. So we have I would say a head start. But let's be honest with you, this kind of technology model, anything goes. And there's a lot of smart people all over the world that are willing to put resources at it. So I think there is going to be a little bit of a race here, but the race may be kind of a concept of quality and quantity. So I think the idea that we're making this kind of investment, getting a head start, is going to really position the United States in a great spot.
Didn't I also see somewhere yesterday that Trump rolled back some of the regulations or safety protocols that President Biden had put into place? Am I right or wrong about that?
Well, let's be fair. I mean, we don't really know what we're doing when it comes to AI safety because people don't really understand what these models can do. So, I mean, for the most part, I think a lot of the provisions that were put in place are probably a little bit overstated. I mean, at the end of the day, we need to have scientists researching and working on these. We need to be developing. And the idea that we put safety measures in place and we think that the foreign governments are not going to go ahead and develop these models anyway, we need to keep up. And I think what the intention of that was is to take off the brakes and to make sure that we can do everything we can to exploit these models. I'm a huge fan of AI safety. I do think it plays a role, and I think there's ways to do that. And particularly as we move into AGI, which is this intelligence model where these AI models can think and work almost autonomously. In those particular situations, it's going to be really important to have safety parameters in place. But in my opinion, I think having an idea about safety is really great today, but not going overboard.
Okay, I've got one more question. Overall, no matter where you stand on the politics of the current president or the former president administration, some of us felt like the government seemed way behind in the field of AI. It's like you felt like some of the legislators didn't even know much about it. What is your perspective now on where we are in getting caught up with AI and maybe moving ahead? The political landscape, how do you think that affects that?
I think there has been a general lack of understanding about AI. I think people even today think of it like Google. They think of it finding their information, maybe writing a blog. That's what people think about. They don't really understand the neural synaptic connections that these models have that can answer these questions and perform tasks and understand problems and do reasoning. They just don't understand that. And that's okay because these models have only been around publicly for a few years. And here you're talking about bringing an entire world up to speed on an absolute new technology that is difficult even for scientists to understand how they work, right? So I'm not surprised about that. I do think the United States is a leader. I don't think this is really political, though. If anything, these models create an incredible democracy. And think about it. You have people now for the very first time in Africa, for instance, which maybe don't have the greatest access to educational resources. They've got the ability to not have to take a class anymore. They can find that information out on even tools that are available today, like Perplexity. I'm telling people that the way we think about education in the future is going to radically change. You're not going to need programmed courses anymore because you can run on the fly, right? You're going to be able to create even video. You're going to be able to bring in resources that you've never been able to do. So if anything, it's going to expand democracy.
Thanks. Appreciate your time, Dan.